It's good to see you tonight. Let's get to Philippians chapter 1, shall we? We are looking tonight, continuing a study of joy in the journey, and I am excited about our study tonight, mainly because I get to start with a story about a runner, and I love this. This is a great story about a gentleman. His name is Stan Cottrell, and Stan Cottrell, since 1955, has logged more than 200,000 miles jogging, running. 200,000 miles running. Now, that includes a couple of trans-USA runs from New York to San Francisco. In fact, I want to get sure I get this right. One of those trips was 1980. He ran from New York to San Francisco in 48 days. That averaged about 66 miles per day. I will remind you that a full marathon is 26.1. This guy averaged more than 2 marathons a day for 48 days. Now, if I can imagine that he did this in other countries as well. I can imagine that at a point, though, that you would be running a race like this long journey, and as you're doing that, you get to a point that you just hurt. You're hurt, you're injured, or man, just the pain is there just from the sheer endurance factor. But it is said that there were times that he would be running and he would be hurting to the point that he's just wanting to quit. But there would always be somebody that would find him, that would run up beside him with a comment like this: "There are many people waiting for you in the next village, and your coming will bring endless joy." That is a statement. I want you to hold on to that all night tonight. I hope you're writing it down for your notes. Your coming will bring endless joy. What a great approach as we think about this tough season that we're in. Again, I don't need to review all of this for us. We've been living this together. That now for a number of weeks we've not been able to get out. We've not been able to go to our favorite restaurant. Some of us have not been able to go to our jobs. Our jobs have been extremely challenged or altered from their norm. And we have not been able to come together in a house of worship. And there's a point where you just get down, you get discouraged. On top of that, you add our power outage this past week that a lot of us experienced. Some of us out of power for 4 or 5 days. That's kind of insult on top of injury. And then on top of a power outage, we had a cold snap. So there's a point that you're just like, man, enough's already. And it's easy to get discouraged. Here's the thing. I want you to remember that phrase, though, that at the time that we get discouraged, at the time that we're wanting to just kind of fold it up and just tuck in our corner, can you remember this? There are people waiting ahead of you, and your coming will bring endless joy. Now, I hope that that's the attitude that we can have as we approach our lesson tonight, that our coming can bring people endless joy. We can help bring joy into the lives of other people. I want us to turn to Philippians chapter 1 because that's where our lesson centers tonight. It's in verses 9 through 11. But I want us to keep that phrase with us, okay? Your coming will bring endless joy. Because the Apostle Paul is writing here. This is a guy, and we'll study this in the weeks ahead. He is writing from jail, from prison. But as he is writing, at this time that he could be discouraged. He should be. For none of us would argue with that. None of us would be point a finger at him of, you have no right to be discouraged. No, we would cut him more slack than that. But Paul's words, this arrival of this letter, brought endless joy to the church at Philippi. So listen to this prayer. Philippians 1, verse 9. "And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Now, Paul loved this church. Paul wanted to see this church grow. But as I make that statement, I need to clarify that statement. Paul wanted to see this church grow spiritually. I find it interesting as Paul writes to other churches in his New Testament letters of how often he mentions of the importance, the desire that he has to see them grow spiritually. It's interesting, grow numerically, not so much interest, there's not so much reference to that. And I think there's a reason, because if we will put first things first, if we have a desire to grow spiritually, then the numeric growth of our church body, doesn't that take care of itself? I think so. I want to look just briefly in Paul's letter to the Ephesians, because this same idea of wanting them to grow spiritually is found there. It's in Ephesians chapter 4. In Ephesians 4 verse 13, he talked about them becoming mature. In verse 15, he said, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is, Christ. Then in Ephesians 4:16, he talked about supporting one another, growing, and building up one another in love. Paul had a passion for seeing the church grow spiritually, for seeing individuals grow spiritually, so that the church as a whole would grow spiritually. Now, Paul didn't just talk about that, he prayed about that. He prayed for the spiritual health, well-being, and growth of the church. In fact, I encourage you to do this, to go back and look in some of his other letters, because those are things he prayed about in Romans chapter 1, Ephesians chapter 1, Colossians chapter 1, 1 Thessalonians chapter. Are you getting the idea? And are you getting the idea where you can find that? Again, look at this mentality, this goal, this drive, this passion, this concern that Paul has for the church. Wherever it may be, he wanted to see them grow spiritually. But he didn't just talk about it, he prayed about it. Okay, so we focus our thoughts back in Philippians chapter 1. That as Paul prays, what is his prayer? There are going to be 5 key ingredients of this prayer that we'll look at this evening. That Paul prays about love, a spirit of excellence, integrity, good works, and then glory and praise to God. And so we're going to look at those 5 ingredients. And so let's begin by looking at what he prayed about when he prayed that this church would love. Now, this first part, our outline in our sermon tonight, does not go in 5 equal parts. This first part where he talks about love, this is a more detailed section. When Paul prayed about love, there's something specific about this love. He said in chapter 1, verse 9, he said, "This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight." A couple of things he prayed about. First of all, it's the importance to understand that this is divine love. This is a love that comes from God. This is a love that, as Paul talked about the importance of us loving one another, it's a love that God has defined for us. This is going to be a love that comes from God. We want to reflect the love of God. We want to love as God. And here's the thing. If we try to make it our goal, if we don't understand this right, and if we just go about life just loving as the world loves, that's going to be a horrible mistake. Because it'll end up that the church, there will be no difference in us, and then what happens in the rest of the world. Man, I look at the rest of the world and I think about the things that it seems like it's been so long back, but it hasn't been. That we talk about in the world of how the world just can constantly beat us down. That is not the love of God. We talk about how in the world that people will love you one day and hate you the next. That is not the love of God. And as we talk about being a people who love, a people who are defined, who are marked by this characteristic of love, it has to first and foremost be a divine love. A love that we get, that we allow God to explain to us, to set the example, to set the bar, the standard of what that love is. Second of all, it's a de facto love. Now, what do I mean by that? It's a pretty fancy word, but all it means is that as Paul's writing to the church, he already sees this in place. So it's not like he's having to change this course. He says here, I pray that your love will what? Abound more and more. It's already in place. He just simply wants to see it grow. Don't be stagnant. Don't be complacent. Let your love grow more and more. So it's a divine love. It's a de facto love. It's already in place. But it is also, third of all, it's a decisive love. Now, this is where we are different from the world again. When we think about love as the world defined love, what is it that the world would say? I fell in love. The world looks at the word love as really just a strong emotion. But I'm going to suggest to you in these next 2 points that love really is a decision. It is a decision. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. Friends, that was a decision God made, that He loved the world. But here's the thing, because when we make that decision, we love when it's easy and we love when it's not. Because the same emotion that you can fall in love, you can fall out of love. That is not the love of God. That is not the love that we want to demonstrate in the church today. It's a decisive love. It is also a dynamic love. What does that mean? It is a love in action. The word love is an action verb. If you go to 1 Corinthians 13, now we all know about this chapter, right? This is Paul's chapter on love, where he talks about love is patient, love is kind, it does not boast, it is not self-seeking, it is not rude, it is not easily angered. He goes through all of these things, but as you look at each of those and what love is not and what love is, it requires action. It requires action for what we are to be. And so love is a dynamic word. That what we talk about in Philippians 1, it is a dynamic love. This love is also deep. He says, I pray that your love will abound, that it will grow in knowledge and depth of insight. It's important that we look in God's Word. I'm just convinced that the more and more that we spend time in God's Word, that the better we're going to be. Because we will understand more, striving to learn what God desires for us, to learn and to appreciate even more the sacrifice that Jesus gave for us. And as we strive to understand that, we will then be in a position to practice that. But I've got to tell you, if you show me a church that they love just in the same way, if I love just in the same way that I did when I was 5 years old, that doesn't say much about my maturity, does it? Because I need to grow, because I need to understand there is a depth of love. One of the things I love is to watch people that have been married for a long time. And I've talked to so many over the years that as they get to their decades of just wonderful memories in that marriage, doesn't mean they've all been easy. But they're great memories of that marriage. One of the things I remember being told some time back is a gentleman came in, had been married for over 60 years, and he talked about the depth of love that he had for his wife. And it was something that even at that time, and definitely even now, I definitely then didn't even understand what he was talking about. Because his understanding and depth of love was so much greater than what I had. I'm so thankful, though, that he shared that, because now, even years later, that becomes a standard. It becomes a bar for me of helping to understand the love we're to have in the church, but especially, in my case, the love that I'm to have for my wife. You see, this love grows, and it grows deeper. And then finally, there's one more idea behind love, and that it is a discerning love. You know, sometimes we think about Christianity, and we think that Christianity is just about this idea of we need to sing about it, we need to say it. But man, this is where love becomes practical. This is where we actually have to back up our words. We have to put them into place, put them into action. I love this statement. This is from a gentleman, William Hendrickson. He says, "A person who possesses love but lacks discernment may reveal a great deal of eagerness and enthusiasm. He may donate to all kinds of causes. His motives may be worthy and his intentions honorable, yet he may be doing more harm than good." Now, that takes a great deal of maturity just to take that comment and to know what to do with that. You see, there is a discernment, there is something where we learn how to put love into practice of what love is not. And there are times where we want to be driven by our heart, but that's where we also understand that love is a decision. It's not this emotion that we need to let. And here's the thing, love is a defining mark of Christianity. But we cannot love as the world loves. If it is going to be a distinguishing mark of Christianity, then we need to love the way that God says to love. We need to love the way the Bible says to love. We need to love the way that Jesus Christ loved. We need to see the love that was evident in the New Testament church, and that needs to be what defines us. So as Paul prays for the church, he prays that, he says, "I hope that your love will grow, that it will abound more and more in knowledge and in depth of insight." Now, I told you that we'd spend a good bit of time on love. We don't spend the same amount of time on the rest of these ideas, so kind of buckle your seatbelt and here we go, okay? But let's get to the next point, that we talk about love, but Paul also talks about a spirit of excellence. He says in chapter 1, verse 10, "So that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ." See, I love this. He's talked about in verse 9 that our love would abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. Look at the first two words of chapter 1, verse 10. So that. You see, these where all of these things are going to connect one to the other. That we love so that we will be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless till the day of Christ. There is a method of thinking that I think can be dangerous and can be sad because it's missing a lot. And that's where we have this idea where we just need to learn the difference between right and wrong. Now, I don't disagree. The Bible talks about right and wrong. The Bible talks about that a part of our maturity is being able to distinguish right from wrong. But Paul tells us something here that we need to know. And that our relationship with God is not just about determining right from wrong. But it is also about being able to discern what is good, what is better, and what is best. And I love that. And I think that is something that is so important, that we teach in the church, that we live out in our lives, that we have this desire for excellence, this spirit of excellence. He talks about that we may be able to discern. Some of your translations say approve. And I like that word there, the word approve. It comes with this idea that we can test something to be genuine, to be real. And so we want to be able to test, we want to be able to live in such a way that we can discern, we can approve, we can attest those things that are best. Now I want to tell you about a study. This was a study that was taken some time ago, and it was where there were a group of people in a room. And a gentleman walked in and he told the people something in the room. He presented an idea. In somewhat detail, he presented this idea. But as he presented it, it was going to require them to change what they already thought. The results of that study are very interesting for us. As we look at that, here's kind of the way all of that fell out. 50% of the people believed the new idea immediately without even thinking about it. 50% believed it immediately without thinking about it. 30% did not believe it, did not change their mind, again, immediately without thinking about it. 50% believed without thinking about it. 30% rejected it without even thinking about it. Then a 15% wanted to wait a little while before they made up their mind, but they did not ask for any clarification. They did not ask for any additional details. 5% of the people analyzed the details and then came to a conclusion. Now you put all those numbers together and here's what the researchers discovered about that. It said that 5% of the people think because they take the information, they analyze it, they work through it before coming to a conclusion. 5% of the people think. 15% of the people think they think. Because they simply took time, but they didn't try to gain any new information. They didn't try to fully analyze it. They just simply took time before they finally came to a decision. 5% of the people think. 15% think they think. But 80% of the people would rather die than think. Now, that's not what Paul talks about in Philippians, is it? He says if our love abounds, if it grows more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, then we will be able to discern or to approve what is best. And so that means that we will take these things and we will look at it, we will study it, and we will... See, Christians, we need to be a people who are not afraid to study the Bible. We need to be a people who are not afraid to think. We need to know what we believe, and we need to know why we believe it. Because if we don't, then we might miss an opportunity to grow in our lives because we simply reject an idea. Or we might end up falling for false teaching. Again, because we're presenting something different, but we don't even think about it. But we don't want to be that people. We want to be a people who read and study God's Word on a regular basis. And because of that, we are able to discern, we are able to approve what is best. Why? Because we're a people constantly wanting to grow spiritually. Impressive point, important point that Paul outlines here in Philippians chapter 1. I do find this verse that you need to write this one down in your notes. It's Romans chapter 12, verse 2, where Paul says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." And so we are putting off the ways of the world, but we are being transformed, we are being changed. And as we grow in our knowledge of God's Word, God's will for our lives, we're able to test and approve what God's will is for us, because it is a good, a pleasing, and a perfect will. It's important to love. It's important because that love leads us to a spirit of excellence. That spirit of excellence also then leads us to have integrity in our lives. What is it that Paul said? He said, so that you may be able to discern what is best and that you may be what? That you may be pure. There are some translations that use the word sincere there. Now, I like that word. I remember first reading this in a book by Charles Swindoll years ago. It's the history, the root of the word sincere. It comes from two Latin words, sincera. And that word literally means without wax. The history behind that was that there would be potters who would put together their pots and they would work hard to make those, and they would, heat them up with fire to get them to where they would be sturdy, they'd be good, they'd be sellable. But sometimes when they were put in the fire, those pots would crack. And there would be the salesmen that were crooked, dishonest, and they would take those jars and they would take wax and they would cover up that crack with wax. If you took it out into the marketplace and just tried to sell it, a lot of people would buy that. They would pay the price as if it was a perfect pot, but it wouldn't be. It would have a crack in it. And the way that you would be able to determine of whether that was a good pot or whether you were paying a high price for an imperfect, for a defective pot would be this, is that you would hold it up to the sun. And so it would be sun tested. Now there were honest businessmen who were really out to make a good, honest living, and what they would do is that they would promote, they would sell their products with this tag attached to it, sincera. These are pure pots. These are genuine pots. These are pots that have been made without wax. You can depend on them. And so that's what we need to be. We need to be a people, because sometimes what we see in the lives of the people in the church today, and we've seen this all of our life, is that there are some people that they have cracks and they have different things, but they try to cover those up. Now, the Bible has a word for that. The Bible uses the word hypocrisy or hypocrite. It's somebody that's trying to hide, trying to cover up who they really are. And Paul says that's not who you need to be. That as you discern what is best, that you may be pure and blameless, that you want to be pure. You want to live pure lives. What does that mean? Well, it means that I'm the same person at work that I am at home, that I am when I'm out at the ball field watching my child play ball, that I am when I go to Walmart, that I am if you meet me in a community committee or some type of group that's trying to work on something. I'm the same person at all of these places, and I'm also the same when I'm at God's people in a house of worship. Now, y'all, that's who we ought to be. That's who we're called to be. That's who Paul was praying that the Philippians would be. That they would be pure, that they would be sincere, that they are the same people living this same type of life as a child of God, as a disciple of Jesus Christ, everywhere they go. Paul said, I want you to be pure, and I want you to be blameless. But then he goes on and he adds to that. And see, at this point we're just continuing to add one to another. This love leads us to a spirit of excellence, which leads us to being a people of integrity, which leads us to being a people of good works. Here's what Paul says in Philippians 1 verse 11. He calls that the fruit of righteousness that comes from Jesus Christ. He talks about the fruit of righteousness that comes from Jesus Christ. Now that is exactly what it sounds like. It's right living that comes through our relationship with Jesus. And it just shows, it manifests, it grows, it produces fruit. He has this same type of discussion in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 9 where he says, "For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth." The fruit of life consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. Then we turn to the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5 verses 22 and 23 where he says, "For the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, meekness, gentleness, and self-control." It's important that we understand that there should be some type of fruit. That as we grow, church, that there is going to be something different about us. If I look at who I am today, and I look at who I was 6 months or a year ago, there ought to be something different about me now. if I'm a person that is continuing to try to grow in love, and I'm trying to grow in this spirit of excellence, in this idea of integrity, then I'm going to be a person, hey, it's changing how I live. It's changing what I do. It's changing the way I treat other people. It's becoming evident in a fruit of right living. In other words, I'm doing good things. I'm doing good things for people. Why? Is it so that people will look at me and see me? No, it's so that people will look and they'll see that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. Everything I do, that just goes ahead and it leads us to this next point. That in everything I do, what is it that Jesus said? He said, let your light so shine before men so that they may see your good works and what? Glorify your Father who is in heaven. You see, everything we do, we want it to bring glory and honor to God. We want to be, what is it Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3:18? That we are reflections of Christ. That we want what we do, how we talk, how we treat others, how we go about our lives, to be a reflection of who we are in Jesus Christ. God gets the glory. Now as we close, I just want to ask you this, because this is the question that really hit me. How would you like to know that someone is praying for you like this? How would you like to know that, first of all, someone wants to see you grow spiritually? Man, your spiritual growth is a concern for them, and they love you, and they want to see you grow spiritually. But you also know that this person is praying for you. They're praying, and what were these things that we went through? That they're praying that you would grow in your love for God, that you would understand the depth of that and the discernment of that, that you grow in your love with God, that you continue to have in your life this spirit of excellence where you're looking to discern those things which are best. That you're living a life of integrity. Somebody is praying for you and for the integrity of your life, and that as you go about in your business, that you're living a life that demonstrates who you are in Jesus Christ. That in your home, you're being the spiritual leader for who you need to be in your relationship with Jesus Christ. And that everywhere you go, it is evident that you are on fire for Jesus Christ, because you're living for Him. And it's just abundant and it's just evident in everything you do. You're a person of integrity. You're a person of good works. And is it you're doing good works so that people will see you? No, you're doing works because this is who you are. I see what God has done for me. I see what Jesus Christ has done for me. And that has rooted itself in my life. I have given my life to Jesus Christ. I have come to Him, and I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and I've confessed Him as Lord. I have repented of my life of sin. I've been baptized for the forgiveness of my sin. And so now what is it I want to do? I want to live for Jesus. And I want other people to see that. I want it to be evident in the life that I live. And I've got somebody that's praying about that. He's praying for me, and that's his prayer for me. And then finally they're praying that in everything I do, I've got somebody that loves me enough and is praying for me, that in everything I do, that I'm bringing glory and honor to God. Man, I've got to tell you, I don't know about you, but all of a sudden I'm not discouraged anymore. Because I know that someone has loved me enough that they're praying. They're giving that kind of attention and detail to praying for me. Now stop for a moment. And do you remember the attitude that we wanted to have at the beginning of this lesson? We wanted to have the attitude at the beginning of this lesson that would say that as other people heard about us coming, that they would say, stay strong, because when they see you, you will bring them endless joy. Now, I just went into vivid detail of what it would be like if we knew that other people were praying for us, and that's what they were praying like. Can I tell you the only thing that I think about that would bring greater joy than to know that someone is praying that way for me? Is to know that I am praying for others that way. And friends, there's our challenge. Again, it's that challenge that I don't look at the church and ask, what's the church doing for me? Who speaks for me? Who's doing something for me? Serve me, serve me, serve me. No. Right now, I want to be a blessing to other people. I want to pray with this kind of depth and passion and concern for other people. Oh, now friends, that's where true spiritual growth comes. When we reach a point of spiritual maturity, that it is important for us to pray for others in that manner. Oh, I hope that we take this lesson to heart. I hope that's something that we desire to do, that that's who we desire to be, even tonight and even in the days ahead. If you've got a church directory, you go through, and it may be a church directory, it may be somebody else that you know that's heavy on your heart, but you go through and man, you think of a couple of people. You don't have to go filling up a sheet of notebook paper tonight, not tonight, but you begin with a couple of people. Who is it that you want to dedicate yourself to pray for them with this kind of depth? Who will you dedicate to do that? You don't have to go announce it with trumpets. Just write it down and start praying for them. Be dedicated to that prayer. And I can't wait to see how God will answer and how He will bless those prayers for other people. I want to play this song tonight as we get ready to close. A lot of us will know this and want you to sing it. I'm going to come back. I've got one more thing to talk about before we close our time together, and then I'll close us out in prayer. But I think this is a great song to consider of what we want to do as we leave tonight and prepare for this week.